Hey everyone, welcome back to Bagel TCG. Today we are doing our regular tier list leading up to a major event. This time we have World Championships in Osaka, and we're going to be doing this classic constructed tier list to place where I think everything's going to be in the meta and talk through it a bit. We've had a pretty interesting ProQuest season leading up to this Worlds, 4 weeks of classic constructed gameplay, and the Rosetta heroes that have come out have seemed quite powerful, and the Misspell heroes that dominated the previous meta are still quite powerful. There were obviously some major bans since uh, this ProQuest season started with the book bannings. All of the draw twos, or at least most of them, are gone, as well as Bonds of Ancestry. And we also had the Dash IO Armory deck come out recently to give some absolutely massive buffs to the Dash IO hero. So, quite a few changes, a big ban, a big release, two big releases actually with the Armory deck and the new set. So, a lot to go over here. I think the first thing we need to say is that Runeblade has gotten some major buffs with Rosetta. So all of the Runeblades, or at least most of the Runeblades, are quite good at the moment. There were some really strong just Runeblade class cards that got printed in the set. And Runeblade was in kind of a bad spot for a while now, honestly. So it's nice to see that what used to be one of the most dominant classes in the game is now, once again, one of the most dominant classes in the game, kind of taking back its rightful place as the best aggro deck. Um, Other things to discuss, Dash.io did get some pretty major buffs, like I said, so that's going to put her pretty high. And the Rosetta heroes are pretty good, but Misspell heroes maybe are still better. The Mystic is just a really good talent, just a really, really good talent. So let's hop into the tier list. As always, I kind of like to start from the top. We have a few really good aggro decks to look at. So these are kind of all the best aggro decks in the meta. We've got Zen in here as well somewhere. We've got KO. Who else would we consider a good aggro deck? Phi, Dash IE. Am I missing any aggro decks? These are the main aggro decks probably. We have Katsu. Um, all right, so let's talk about where I put them. I might move them around as I discuss it, but these are kind of the snap initial impressions. Um, Dash IO, huge buffs. Cerebellum Processor is one of the strongest cards in the game at the moment, and she got some nice armor to go with it. She also got a good new boost card that can give her some free counters, theme counters. I think it's called Fast and Furious. It also can be another red zipper hit, basically, or sorry, red 0 to 60 being another 0 to 4. And so, pretty good buffs all around. Cerebellum Processor, probably the biggest one, of course. Any kind of card draw is pretty good in Flesh and Blood, as we've seen with the most recent bannings. So I think she deserves a pretty high spot. I would already have put her and Dash IE. They both are just aggro mech heroes. They have always been quite solid, so they'd both probably be A tier. But I think the new cards probably put Dash IO in S tier. I do think out of every hero that's going to be in S or A tier, she's most likely the hardest to play perfectly. You have like 15 decisions every turn on what to do. I think you are almost never going to make the right decision path on a given turn. Not that you won't make a good path, but if there's 1,000 decision paths, you'll probably not hit the very best one. There's just way too many branching decision paths in the deck, and I think you can play her very well, but I don't think you can ever play her perfectly. I think a person who has put a lot of time and practice and reps into Dash IO, especially if they did it leading up to the new deck, because the new cards are good but don't change fundamentally too much about how the deck plays. Um, I think someone like that could win the entire world championship with her, and that's why I think she's S tier. But yeah, there's a bit of an asterisk here because I think the average player is like B plus to low A tier with her. She's kind of too difficult to play. On the other axis, I think Visai is fairly easy, especially in comparison to Dash IO. Um, the best thing for Viscerai at the moment is that there is no ice in the format. The reason I say that is because Viscerai and even his other Runeblade counterpart, Aurora, and Azalea, all are pretty redline at the moment. I think the best version of each build plays like 6 blues or less. Um, probably caps at 6 blues for each of these heroes. So you're almost entirely reds with some yellows splashed in. I think you probably want like 45 reds at least in most of these decks. And so they really don't want to be pitching at all. At least almost every turn they don't want to be pitching. So Frostbites, any kind of taxing is really hard for them to get through, but lucky for them at the moment that almost doesn't exist. There's like, I guess, hamstring shot. Is the only card I can think of off the top of my head that increases the tax on cards. So very little to no taxing at the moment, which makes these decks really able to pop off with insane rates, not having to go any pitching at all. And I think Viscerai makes the best use of that, at least at the moment. Mordred Tide, Revel, all the new cards he got, Deadwood Dirge, Malefic Incantation, all these cards are 0 cost. He uses them very well. He also gets the most benefit from his hero ability, by having stuff be 0 cost, because you get a rune chant every time you play a card after your first non-attack, right? And so the more cards you play, the more free rune chants you get from your hero ability. So he scales the best by playing as many cards as possible. He gets the best advantage from not pitching, because every card you get to play is another free point of damage. Whereas, Aurora obviously has some really insane pitchless hands that are a bunch of 0 for 4 into 0 for 4 into 0 for 4 and getting 4 value from every card. But her hero ability actually kind of wants you to have a blue. I mean, you have to pay 2 to get the embodiment of lightning. I suppose Azalea's doesn't care either way if you have a blue or not in hand with her hero ability, but she doesn't get an advantage like Viscerai does from being pitchless. He's just really good. He does so much damage, and the fact that he can also slow down for a minute if he needs to and stack up a bunch of rune chants, I think puts him in a really dominant position to be kind of the best aggro deck. I'd say he is better than Dash.io in the only sense that he is easier to not mess up on, right? Like, he still has a lot of decision lines. Runeblade is also a fairly complicated class. It's not like Unga Bunga Fi, just head jab, head jab, head jab. You still have to make quite a few decisions, but it is simpler than Dash.io. I think you can potentially play a perfect game on Viscerai, never making an incorrect decision. And I don't think that's possible in Dash.io, to be honest. So I think these are probably the 2 best aggro decks and what most people will be looking out for. Now, Zen is interesting because I think he's the best anti-aggro deck because of Zen state tokens. He might even be S tier because of this, but I'm just going to put him top of A tier. Yeah, he can make Zen states fairly easily. Obviously, his chess piece makes a Zen state whenever he wants it, but you can also play some other Zen state creation. You can do the wax on, wax off cards. Not even that hard to get off, and they are pretty great right now because, yeah, wax, I don't know which one's which, but the red, the red, I think wax off 0 for 3 but gets +2 if it blocks a 0 cost is a 0 for 5 block into most aggro decks at the moment because they are playing all these 0 costs. And then the other one, the blue, gets you a Zen state pretty easily after. In general, Zen states are pretty broken. Not only do they really destroy Dash.io's weapon on a high octane turn and make it easy to block or break points, but they also completely turn off rune chants. So I think he is the best anti-aggro deck. I don't think he's as good at being an aggro deck, unfortunately. Like, if you're playing against a deck that wants to block out, Zen will have a little bit more trouble. So he's almost kind of a mid-range deck at the moment, but just leaning more aggro. I think he is favored into these 2 aggro decks, so he's maybe should be S tier. But like I said, he has some trouble into some of the other decks we're going to look at, and so for that reason, I'll put him in A tier. Azalea and Aurora, all these other 4 decks, maybe KO belongs down here. He's not really putting up much results, and he is kind of doesn't have the insane ceiling like these other heroes seem to do. Maybe like this. Azalea is also not in the best spot at the moment. I think she also kind of struggles into these other decks and doesn't quite have the gas she needs to get through the defensive decks at the moment. So to make it more, I mean, I can't just put everything in S and A tier. Otherwise, what's the point of predicting the meta like this? So I think I'll narrow my predictions down a little bit. I almost want to do it like this, because I think it is so hard to play Dash IO. Aurora is just standard good aggro. This is a bit of a crazy prediction, but I think the Zen states are pretty interesting if you can time them really well, and especially into Viscerai. So I'll put aggro like this. I think this is uh, a bit out there, but we'll do it like this. Now the anti-aggro deck. So I think Florian is the first one that comes to mind, at least, along with New. These are probably the best two defensive decks at the moment. New has been historically the best ones from the last meta. She's what preys on Zen. She still preys on Zen. It's actually probably easier for her to beat Zen now. Her Viscerai matchup is not as good because Siren's Call doesn't hose him like it does Zen. She also doesn't really have insane on hits in the same way. Like Weakest Link Weakest Link does nothing into Viscerai, and Erase Face is okay, but it really just turns off like his hero ability a little bit, which is sometimes good if they have a Mordred Tide, but isn't always good. So yeah, I think she has not the best Viscerai matchup. Uh, Probably a little favored into Dash IO, and also kind of even into Aurora. Her Runeblade matchup is not as good as it is for her Mech and um, Ninja matchup. I'd say she's quite favored into Mech and Ninja, and then kind of even, if maybe just slightly favored, into Runeblade. Florian does beat New pretty well. I mean, in my opinion, at least. He has a little more trouble into he's kind of the opposite matchup spread. I think he's better into the two Runeblades than she is, but I think he's maybe a little worse into the Ninja and Dash IO. But either way, I think these are probably the two best disruptive decks. I think Azuri gets an honorable mention in B. Azuri did win the PT, but yeah, I don't know. Azuri's good, but does have some issues into especially Viscerai, where Azuri does not run a lot of blues. Both New and Florian run like 24 at least blues, and sometimes 27 or something. So they're fine pitching into Rune Chants. But most of the Azuri builds don't run that many blues and might die to Arcane a bit too easily. Okay, and then Enigma is kind of the last one that you probably expected. Yeah, Enigma is just so good. It's interesting because there's so many good aggro decks at the moment. I mean, this is 7, 8 aggro decks that are all not bad. I mean, the B tier ones are okay, but at least 4 really good aggro decks, which would make it seem like it's a bad meta for Enigma. But to be honest, the hero's just broken. Like, Enigma is a fundamentally broken hero, in my opinion. I think she's too good. I think she's only held back by aggro being so good at the moment. And when aggro wasn't seeming as good at the very beginning of the set, look at like early pro quests, she was only losing to Aurora, and like these other decks weren't played that much yet. Yeah, Enigma just looked so utterly oppressive. The fact that you can only kill the auras by hitting her and you can't attack them directly is just really, really insane. It's not like Dromai where maybe you had a chance if you were this disruptive deck, because if you're Florian or New, you can just hit the dragons and kill them, right? There's nothing like that. You can't pop them with Phantasm either. You have to somehow get through her 12 block a turn, right? So it's usually impossible for these slower decks to deal 13, 14 a turn. And so they just have like a almost impossible chance against Enigma. So she's just a really fundamentally broken deck. Even if she is a little unfavored into some of the aggro decks, she even can fatigue because she blocks so well that I've seen her fatigue Dash IOs or any of these other aggro decks. It's certainly possible. And if you bring Counter Blessings Enigma, you have a slightly worse time into the disruptive decks, but you might just slaughter these aggro decks. I've seen some people who have a switchboard version where the Count Your Blessings are in the sideboard for the aggro decks, and then regular Enigma without them into everything else. So yeah, the hero is just insane. I think the rest of the heroes on this list I'm just going to place now. I'd say, okay, before I just throw everything else on here, I think these heroes at the bottom here are not as good, and these are going to be kind of the core meta we see at Worlds. Um, if I had to predict a hero that wins Worlds, I think it's a Visai or a Zen. I almost want to just really say Zen because I think that's the underdog pick, and I like the underdog pick. Um, but it'd be cool to see Visai win something after not winning in a long time. So I'll say Visai, especially because I think I have a teammate showing up on Visai, so we'll do that as well. I'll say Visai wins Worlds, but I think these are probably the top 3 heroes that are going to be in top 8. I think also obviously A tier could be as well. I could see one of each of these in top 8, something like that. All of these heroes are quite good. B tier is fine. I think each of these heroes has a bit too much of a weakness at the moment in the meta, where maybe one of these 5 could sneak into top 8. But I wouldn't be surprised if none of these top 8'd. They're all okay, but they're kind of just okay at the moment, in my opinion. And they kind of do a weaker thing than something up here does, right? Like Dash IE is just kind of worse than Dash IO. KO is just kind of a weaker aggro deck, just like Azalea. Same with Phi. These are just kind of slower, less impressive aggro decks. And Azuri is a little less consistent as a disruptive deck than New or Florian. So yeah, these are what I would probably predict as the top 8 decks. Plus, one of them has 2 copies in the top 8 or something like that. Probably 2 Enigmas, because I would guess Enigma might have one of the higher representations. Okay, and just throwing everything else out. Most stuff's in D tier right now. Maybe he's okay. These are all bad. Kano can always pop off. Levia's not bad. Max isn't bad. It's bad. Prism's okay. Reinar's okay. Riptide's okay. Victor's fine. And then Runeblade cards are just okay. So, yeah. Cat has decided this is the correct tier list. And so, yeah, I know I just threw everything else here, but I don't honestly think there's a lot of point talking about decks that I think have no chance. I think unless there's kind of a rogue pop-off, most of these decks are not going to be seen in any significant way in the meta. So, yeah, this is the tier list for Worlds. We will see how close I get. I really like that Runeblade is back in the equation, though. I mean, I started in Monarch, and Runeblade was good for so long after I started, with Chain being really good, and then Briar being really good, Visai with Skeleton being really good. So I enjoy Runeblade, and I'm used to Runeblade as a top aggro deck, and I'm happy to see it back in its rightful spot in the meta. So thank you so much for watching. Please comment below what you think is going to win Worlds. Maybe even in your top 8 prediction. Let me know what you agree with in the tier list or what you don't agree with on the tier list. And I'll see you next time.